that was what started it for me. Bebop, and Cool and Miles and Coltrane, and then I started to get into that, and then, and the list goes on of discovering all of those things, you know what I mean? So it was literally like early jazz and big band, ragtime, all the old drummers, Papa Joe Jones, and all the greats, Count Basie and Duke Ellington. And then later on, it was like 18-inch bass drum, Max Roach, Philly Joe Jones.
And I was playing a jam session in Armory Square, Syracuse, with Rick Malavano, this piano player. And they came out and sat in. Vinny sat in on drums. Josh sat in on piano. And we played Lady Bird and Alone Together, which we listened to on the ride down to Nashville.
To Nashville, yeah. Well, not that take. Someone else.
No,
right. But the songs.
Art Blakey.
Hi, I'm Chris Brewer, and you're listening to Meinl Radio.
Today, our guests are Meinl Cymbals artist Josh Dion and his bandmate Geoff Kraly. Josh and Geoff are the New York City duo known as Paris Monster. Paris Monster straddles many genres: garage, experimental, techno, soul, rock, R&B. The list goes on. In the duo, Josh handles drums, keys, and vocals, while Geoff handles bass guitar and modular synth. Together they write some of the most compelling music to have been heard in a long while. We sat down with both Josh and Geoff to discuss their backgrounds and their take on music, and to gain a little bit of insight into how they have created such a unique musical situation. We learned a lot from our conversation with Josh and Geoff, and we hope that you will too.
So I'd like to welcome everybody for listening today. We've got Josh Dion and Geoff Kraly of Paris Monster here with us. And we've got some good questions to ask you guys. Hopefully they're good. You guys are a band based out of New York City, and you're a duo. And there's a lot going on with each of you. Drumming, singing, keyboards, bass playing, incredible effects. You guys have a sound that you can't categorize. And all of that is informed by a pretty long journey along the way that got you there. Give me a sense of your journey towards where each of you are now. And then after each of you have done that, just tell me how you think that brought the two of you together. Why don't you go first, Josh?
Okay. Well, I mean, I grew up with music. My dad's a drummer. So that was the beginning for me, which was just, and my older brother was a great influence on me in terms of hipping me to cool records. I mean, I was like, 5 years old or whatever. It's just so lucky to have that. But I used to spend summers with my dad, and he was an audiovisual tech at this high school, which the high school that I ended up going to later in life. And I would spend summers there at the library. And it was like I discovered blues and early jazz there. So I'll never forget that. That was like a huge thing for me.
And how old were you when you discovered blues and jazz records?
I'm guessing somewhere, I always say 8, somewhere around 8. It was somewhere around that time. And I became obsessed with it. And I had all this time back then, and it was, so that was a huge moment for me. Like, I always think of that as being a thing. I was just like very fertile. And then I got into, like I said, I think I had told you before, I was a part of a Pentecostal church from the ages of 13 to about 16 or so. And that was where I started to get the idea of singing. And it was a spiritual awakening, if you will, that definitely shapes who I am today and the way I play music. And then after that, I would say my late teens, early 20s, I got into jazz, completely into jazz, bebop, jazz tradition, and all of those things, and meeting those people and starting that journey, which led to moving to New York and the reason to move to New York. My original reason for moving to New York was to be a jazz drummer. All of those things put together kind of makes me who I am.
What happened between the time you were 8 and you had that epiphany with jazz and blues records at the library till the time when you started to really dig into jazz again? Did you leave jazz for a while?
Well, yeah, because when I was in the church thing, I was listening to gospel music and like contemporary Christian music, and it was kind of like that whole like, oh, you don't listen to, I wasn't checking out records. You know what I mean? Really,
it was wrong to check out records.
was a little bit of that going on, you know. I mean, of course, so many people are musicians in my family wasn't really like that, but I wasn't even interested in it really. I didn't play drums like I did before or after during that time. The difference was I was into early jazz. It's almost like chronological. I didn't know Charlie Parker until I was a late teen. That was what started it for me. Bebop, and Cool and Miles and Coltrane, and then I started to get into that, and then, and the list goes on of discovering all of those things. You know what I mean? So it was literally like early jazz and big band, ragtime, all the old drummers, Papa Joe Jones, and all the greats, Count Basie and Duke Ellington, and then later on it was like 18-inch bass drum, Max Roach, Philly Joe Jones.
So then you moved to New York, and at that point, you went to the New School?
I went to William Patterson, which is in New Jersey, kind of in the same realm as all the New York schools, but in a little bit of a more suburban environment.
From that point, did you have pretty much all the tools you needed in a musical sense to just keep picking up what you needed along the way and develop? Were there any more huge moments that you look back on and think, man, that really mattered? Or was it just a matter of picking up a little bit here and a little bit there? And the real groundwork had already been laid out. And at that point, it was just sort of finishing up who you were becoming musically.
Everything added up. It was like, I think my first year of college was the year that I really got a lot out of it. And I think everything after that was more about the social environment and the other folks that were there. And I think for me, the most growth was in doing gigs. And I think, when I really started to take singing and songwriting seriously, which was actually when I kind of left college, that was when I started to say to myself, oh, this is something that's unique that I can do, that I feel.
You knew you could do it for a living at that point. It
became a thing,
yeah.
and it didn't happen overnight. Like it would just be like one or two songs a night I'd sing, and like I wasn't sure how I really felt about it. I used to listen to records and all my favorite singers like Maurice White and people like that, and be like, how the hell do you sing like that? And I'd probably try, but I knew it was in me to feel that and find my voice, and it took a while. I wasn't a natural singer. I was a natural musician who learned to sing and learned to discover that.
I spent all this time on something without breaking for lines for no other reason than a vision could drawn up right. It's not perfectly written with care and precision, and it won't take off flight.
You said that you really started to figure things out gigging. What did you really learn on a gig that really brought you even farther forward? Was it the getting along with people and learning how to just...
Yeah, well, exactly. It was like, it was so much, I think that I'm a real pleaser. I was really just the mechanics of doing a good job, playing the right tempo, having a good sound, whether it was even a sound that I liked, it was what that band was into. A lot of times it was folks older than me. You know what I mean? So I think that I learned to do that. I learned to, because I'm kind of a ramshackle musician at times, and I think that I did go through a phase where I was learning how to really do a good job, and that was a good thing for me. And I did every gig. I said no to nothing. I was doing all kinds of stuff, and learning, having guys yell at you about the tempo and, just all kinds of things. I can throw footballs through your eighth notes, stuff like that. And
so you were learning on the job.
Learning on the job, and figuring it out. Now that's one element. Now, the best thing happened when I realized that I had energy and spirit that brought something to the music that was special and that people felt. And that happened maybe later on, my mid-20s. I started to people feel something because we're connecting, and I can do that. I can bring that. It's kind of almost like the church. For me, it was that thing, kind of coming into it. And when I met other musicians that were like-minded, and they wanted that in the music, they wanted that connection, and I was like, oh, that's actually what it is. You know what I mean? So it's like, and both of those things can live together because you want to play your instrument well and have a handle on that stuff. But yeah.
What about you, Geoff? What would your journey be?
The reason I picked up a bass, it was almost practical. It was my brother played drums. He's a couple years older than me, and he had a rock band that didn't have a bass player. It was drums, keyboards, and guitar. I think my mom asked me if I wanted to play guitar or something, just to pick up an instrument that I wasn't playing in like high school band or something. And I somehow realized if I pick bass, just because he doesn't have a bass player in his band, I'll be in a band all of a sudden, like right away if I can get good at it fast. It was just a few months after picking it up, I think 3 or 4 months after picking up bass, they asked me to join, and the first gig was in like a month, and so I had to quickly learn like 40 songs to play on this gig: Elvis tunes, Beatles, Stones, classic rock, which was like the best thing that could have happened right away. It's like within a month, learn all these songs, like figure out. So it forced me to figure out what do all these songs have in common, and like very quickly you realize if you're, that there's a formula to a lot of this, and you start to parse the information and figure out how pop music works. And then
that's a huge education.
Yeah, it was and being forced to do it was the best. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, it's like, well, that skill I'm using every day now in New York. Yeah, so that's what got the ball rolling. Prior to that, my dad is also a drummer, which is something we have in common. Our dads are both drummers, and he had a band and still does with he's a college professor in upstate New York, and he had a band with other college professors, and so they'd be rehearsing downstairs, and I probably was supposed to be asleep, but was like listening, down the stairs. I don't remember how they sounded, but I definitely remember just, making some kind of lasting impression of, oh wow, there's like this cool thing you can do where like people come over to your house and you play songs together, and I don't really understand what that's about, but it seems like they're having fun, and it's loud, and that's cool. So after a few years of playing with my brother's band, or maybe even just about a year, I mean, I loved it and like found myself practicing constantly. It wasn't something that I needed to be told to do on bass, to like, oh, you need to go practice your bass. I would just like get home from school and just do it for hours. Just loved the work.
At that point, who were the bass players that influenced you, or musicians that influenced you?
The first bass player I remember loving, maybe I didn't even realize that it was like, oh, I like this bass player, but I remember loving John Paul Jones playing with Led Zeppelin. That's probably my first favorite band. The first concert I went to was Sting, years before. I think I was 6 or something like that. But John Paul Jones, John Entwistle soon after that. And then I probably started getting into, the bass heroes. Victor Wooten was an early influence, and Gary Willis. And Victor Wooten, I was actually, when I turned 15, was fortunate enough to sit in with him on a show. He just like randomly invited me up and let me play a tune with him. Played Spain by Chick Corea. Totally random. I just was talking to him after a Flecktone show, and he's like, and I was like, oh, I'm going to see you in a month with your duo project with J.D. Blair. And he's like, oh, you want to sit in? And my parents said I turned white. I was like, oh my God, my hero is asking me to sit in with him. And so I did, and we stayed in touch, sat in with him again the next year. So that was definitely a landmark. And he's the nicest guy. I mean that alone was like the nicest thing. Like I think I always keep that in mind. Like when I'm working with students or whatever, it's, he didn't need to do that. That was pretty generous. I have a show, I'm going to bring a kid up,
It's really cool.
That's very
without
cool.
knowing how he plays or anything, Yeah, that was really fun. We have it on VHS, you know. So around that same time, I met a great pianist in upstate New York named Rick Montalbano. And that meeting him was when, I think that's when I really started to see that, oh, this is something you can take really seriously, music, you know, and this is something you can get good at in a different way than just having fun in the basement or something. He started to bring me out on gigs. He played 3 nights a week at a restaurant in Rome, New York. And he would tell me, come on up whenever you want. You know, like the third set, I think it was playing mostly upright then. He'd say, just, you know, sit in. He'd throw me some of the tip money. And he would just call tunes, like old, you know, jazz standards. And he'd ask me, like, hey, do you know this tune? And I'd say no, because I had never heard of it before. And he'd say, great, and he'd count it off, you know. And we would just start playing it. And it was like, you know, and there's people there eating dinner, and there's a jazz pianist and some kid trying to learn the tune on the gig.
Would he give you any indication?
No, just by ear. Yeah.
Wow.
Didn't even tell you
what key it was in.
Maybe he would tell me the key or something. Yeah. Every now and then he'd play like a rubato version out front, and like I'd have to like, okay. And same thing as like having to learn those classic rock tunes.
Right.
It was like, okay, I need to right now figure out how this music works, like how structure and harmonic structure and form works, and you know, figure out the patterns so that you're not memorizing every note, but you're memorizing, you know, like a path through the harmony, getting from point A to point B, and like where it departs to and how it gets back, and where the bridge goes and how it gets back or whatever. And then to be able to retain that, and then also to be able to make music on it, you know, because he'd give me a solo on it. So I'd have to now with all that, I have to express myself or whatever. Those are some big landmarks looking back. And then I went to Northwestern University in Evanston and studied music cognition. You know, another big landmark actually in college was in my freshman year. I loved Chicago, but it's because Evanston's north of Chicago. I always had this feeling from visiting. We met through a mutual friend of mine that I grew up near, that Josh went to college with. So I made a couple trips out to William Patterson to visit that friend, and saw Josh and hung with him there. And back in Chicago, I always had this feeling of like, oh, over there in New York or in, you know, near New York, that's where like the real music's happening. Whether that's true or not, that's beside the point. I just had that feeling. That was just an interesting thing to have happen. And I thought about transferring at some point, but for whatever reason decided to stay. Probably mostly because I had some great teachers out there. But knowing that thinking that there's this other world of like the real music going on 15 hours east of me, it forced me to say, okay, well, what can I get out of being here, not there, you know? Or what can I get here that I can't get there? And so, and actually it was maybe a little distance from the pressure of being on the scene already, making sure I was checking in and seeing what was going on there creatively. There was no question that the day I graduated, I headed immediately to my parents' house and then on to New York. And there was no question that's where I was going. And I loved my time there. I had a great teacher, and a guy named Mike Koger and Steve Rodby from the Pat Metheny group, and had a lot of great opportunities to gig there and hear a lot of great music. And anytime someone from New York came through and to play like the Jazz Showcase or the Empty Bottle or whatever, I would be there for every set. You know, I'd heard like every single set of the Dave Holland Quintet, and literally the next week, every single set of Joe Lovano and Idris Muhammad and Cameron Brown, and anything that came from New York. And I would be there. And then I moved to the city, and somehow this band started. Josh came to upstate New York.
Yeah, it was our freshman year. My
Your
freshman year
freshman
with
year.
Vinny Speraza, the mutual friend.
And I was a senior in high school. So you came back with Vinny like some holiday, probably Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
to his parents and spent it there. And I was playing a jam session in Armory Square, Syracuse, with Rick Montalbano, this piano player. And they came out and sat in. Vinny sat in on drums. Josh sat in on piano. And we played Lady Bird and Alone Together, which we listened to on the ride down to Nashville. from Brooklyn,
yeah.
to-
Well, not that take. Someone
yeah,
else
no,
playing.
no,
Right.
no,
But the songs.
Art Blakey Quintet. And after they got off the stage, Rick got back up to the piano and he turned around and goes, "That guy knocked the whole piano out of tune."
Oh, God.
That guy meaning Josh. So
Yeah.
he'd it's a heavy-handed piano technique.
Seems like a drummer playing piano.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So when you got to New York City, how long did it take for one of you guys to call the other, or did you bump into each other?
I think we bumped into each other on Sideman projects or something.
We'd been friends for a long time.
you stayed in touch.
in the same circles, and
Because after that, like when I went to visit Vinny at William Patterson a couple times,
Yeah.
I saw Josh both times. I don't think we played, but
I don't even know if we played.
I don't
It's
think
weird.
we
I
played,
kind of
but-
felt like we did without even. Yeah, it was. And
we
Jeff,
we certainly hung.
we did
Yeah.
so many gigs together, like over 2000 to 2009. We did plenty of gigs.
Yeah,
like
singer-songwriter things.
Yeah, like-
church gigs.
I had a band that he would occasionally sub in. I mean, Jeff was like our.
The Josh Dion band.
Yeah. Jeff was like somebody that anytime if Brian Colleen couldn't make the gig, we'd be like, get Jeff, or other projects like with that whole
Crew.
social
Yeah.
scene in mind. Jeff was always involved in some way. you know.
And so at what point did you guys make a conscious decision to put Paris Monster together?
Yeah, that happened when the Josh Dion band ended, and then I put together something just kind of myself and hired Geoff because Geoff had started to really develop his sound. He started getting into pedals and started getting into synths and started writing songs and all this while that was happening. And I was like, oh man, so I was making this record and really wanted his sound on it. And some other session players and things like that, and kind of did that whole thing and then realized that like, this is not what I want to do. And kind of put the brakes on that and decided to do this, which was like totally different than anything that I've ever done before. I mean, it was just like starting brand new.
So you called Geoff. Did you literally call him up and say, hey man, we got it?
How did that happen, actually? I don't know. I think it was like, we had some gigs already. We had gigs, we had leftover gigs just from Josh Dion band world, kind of festival stuff, and we did some random gigs where we hadn't really fully realized this concept, but we had a ball even just doing those gigs. I mean, we didn't have really that many gigs at first.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it's kind of nebulous how it actually started, I guess. There were with that project after the Josh Dion band, Josh was trying a bunch of different really great guitarists, it seemed like we went through like many guitarists.
That's right. Yeah.
And I remember at some point us rehearsing some of your tunes without a guitarist, and with the thought that, maybe like you're still looking for who that guitarist is. And that, I think, kind of just turned into, if we can't find the guitarist, or if you can't find the guitarist, maybe that's saying it should be this. And Josh Alsher was interested in playing keyboards at that point.
Yeah.
So that, that space being there, that vacated by the guitarist, allowed him to explore that. I
just didn't want to do something that was kind of like, I had been in a band that had such great guitar presence, and I really wanted to do something with a completely different color. And Geoff had such a strong personality in what he was doing and what his concept was. I mean, he had, he just gotten into the modular thing. Like, he was just starting to get into that, and all the pedals and the old amps, tube amps, and just his sound was a thing. You know what I mean? And it was just like, these two things are kind of, that's all you really need, And once we started to realize, because I had no idea what the modular world was up until this point. I had never known what that was, until Geoff hipped me to it, and it opened up this whole new world for me. Actually, playing with Geoff in general opened up a whole world to me, like not only in the synth world, but I'd say like in the avant-garde world too. I'd say in the past 5 years of my life, like not, with Geoff and other musicians in New York, like my whole world has changed in terms of like how, the type of musician I am and how comfortable I am with freedom and like the outskirts of things.
Wow, that's a huge statement.
Yeah, and it's like, man, I'm so glad it happened, because I think deep down there was always something like that in me, but it took a while.
I believe this tender flimsy love to be treasured, sleek and solid gold.
To everybody out there who's listening to this podcast, who's listening to some of the music that we're dropping in and out of the podcast from this session we did today, and I was talking to the guys about this earlier, you'll hear the obvious things. You'll hear the singing, you'll hear the drumming, you'll hear the keyboard that Josh plays, but then there's this whole other world going on that really gives you every bit as much mood, but it growls, but it's also understated, and that's what Geoff does. And I was telling the guys earlier that he's the secret weapon of the band, and every bit as relevant and present and important. It's one could not exist without the other in this duo. You guys both bring just this huge thing to the table. You have this incredible, it seems like this vast, deep knowledge of music, and can reference many songs and many artists, and speak in an educated fashion about them. It makes me wonder how much time you guys have spent in your lives listening to music. When you talked about your first band with your brother, you had to learn 40 songs right away, covers. I thought, wow, that's incredible. How many people just jump right into the deep end like that? And so I think maybe that got you started on your journey. How much time do you guys, even today, spend just listening?
That got me thinking about a quote, Stephen King, the author, actually, that said that something along the lines, I think it was Stephen King, something along the lines of, if you don't have time to read, you don't have time to write. Put that on music. If you don't have time to listen, you don't really have time to make it, because you need the context. You're always of your time, so you need to know what came before and what's happening now, to know where you can take it. Regardless of what your direction is and where you decide you want to take your own music, you can't separate yourself from the lineage and from what's going on right now. I definitely can think of times when like I wanted to, feel like I'm out. Oh, I'm not a part. I'm such a unique thing. It's like I'm existing out on my own. But it's like no, you're a part of a history. So you need to be aware of it, and it needs to be every day, as much as you can. I don't know. And focused listening too, not just in the car as you're driving around and like making dinner or whatever, but sit down and put a vinyl record on and do nothing else but listen to it.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, it's wild, especially now, because like even just on the way down here, we just went on like the YouTube thing where it's like you find one band and then you find like 10 bands you hadn't heard of that kind of were in that genre. It's all connected now. It's really, so I think about the person I was, like when I explained being in the library, like as a little kid. And I think that I may have like lost my way a few times with that kind of focus, but it's like sometimes I'll find that again. And now that we have all this knowledge, with just being able to find anything at any time. And I mean, hell, I go on Facebook sometimes and it's just like, okay, I've got like 5 new videos to watch of like things that I'd never seen or heard before. I mean, it's just, it's insane keeping up on bands, and so the people, I feel like just the people that I hang out with, have you heard this? Check this out. I'm just like, I mean, man.
Where did you amass that? Was it from playing a lot of gigs where you had to do covers and standards, or did you have points in your life where you just went on crazy binges and you dug as deep as possible?
That's what it is for me.
Crazy binges.
Crazy binges. I mean, it was like jazz was like that. Philly Joe Jones was like that. I mean, you used to be able to do gigs at Borders, and it was like $75 worth of CDs. And I would just go and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to get every Prestige album that ever existed. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's just like, and I had a lot of Borders gigs. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just one thing, but it was the same thing when I was a kid with blues and funk. Oh my God. I mean, anybody who knows me from late high school and college, I mean, I'm sure they'd say, yeah, Josh and his funk music. That's probably all I talked about, so I think that's kind of still all I talk about.
I can't help but notice, Josh, that you have a rhythmic feel and also a voice that oozes so many aspects of the very best that African American music in the U.S. has had to offer. To what degree has African American music influenced you, and in which ways do you see it show itself in your art?
It goes back to the church thing. The church I went to was multiracial. There were preachers that had kind of that, the old school Baptist vibe. It wasn't a Baptist church, but and the singers there. I remember there was a family, the Harris brothers and sisters, would get up and sing, "Up above my head I hear music in the air," and songs like that, and just like, and it was fantastic. I mean, I could just see myself in the front seat, and I would bring my notebook, and just like, I was like so into it. You know what I mean? And it was great because I enjoyed the church because it was not about being a virtuoso, even though some of these singers were, but they blended together. They had a bass voice. It was like the Dixie Hummingbirds. Matter of fact, I didn't know who the Dixie Hummingbirds were then, who they were back then, but then I realized later, I'm like, oh, these are the songs that they used to sing, and I would sit there and they would blend together and just the soul singing that whole thing. And of course, prior to that, I told you that I had discovered the blues, which was mostly from having, Cream records and Led Zeppelin records and looking at the records and being like, the people that wrote these songs are not the people in this band. Right. So I'd be like, who's Robert Johnson? Who's Willie Dixon? Who's Muddy Waters? So that was another element of it. Both of those things would be, I would say, the roots of what you're talking about. And then when I was in high school, I got deep into funk, like super deep into funk. I had a friend, Justin Wade, who was one of my early influences as a singer. He's a singer. And he kind of had like a Stevie Wonder kind of thing going on. And I remember he hipped me to some music, and I just went with it. Like, I went nuts. Like, I got a radio show on like the college station near me, and like, got like 300 funk records, and there were some local people who knew about it, and like, I just went nuts. I got like way into it. It's all I listened to, like every Earth, Wind & Fire album, and every, but and not just that, like Tower of Power too, and just anything that was for soul music from different parts of America, everything, like still learning about it. But I think all that music is really inside me.
How conscious of a role does musical lineage play within your music? And what I really want to know is, are there times where you sort of smile to yourself and you feel like you're almost trying to channel a certain artist specifically? Like, man, this is what I'm going for. I'm going for this guy right here. I'm going for some Aretha right here. Or... And same for you, Geoff. Do you guys ever, is the lineage important? Obviously it is, but is it consciously important to this day as a professional playing? And are there still guys that you just, down in your little kid musical heart, you're trying to channel while you're playing?
Absolutely. I mean, I could tell you them all right now. I mean, like, and just speaking of, Roger Hawkins, I mean, anytime I have a snare drum with kind of like like almost the way the snare sounded today, almost like lower tuned, but still rim shot, kind of like Chain of Fools, or I don't even know if he's the drummer on that, but just any of that. Anytime I play a fill like that, I think Roger Hawkins. I am Roger Hawkins right now. It's interesting when you have a thing, and almost a thing you can't deny. You are who you are, oftentimes, and you sound different even when you're trying to tap into what someone else does. It sounds completely different when you do it sometimes. Like when I would try to play like Zach Danziger, I don't sound anything like him, and maybe I am able to stumble upon a cool thing then, because I'm more of like a Roger Hawkins or something. It's like a weird. That's how you get those mixtures in people.
What about you, Geoff?
My initial thought was, no, I don't consciously try to do that, call on an influence in a way, but I immediately found myself to be a total arrogant ass saying no. So but I think, so while Josh was talking, I swear I was listening, but I was also thinking that maybe what I find when I'm finding myself thinking of other influences, it comes up more that I'm kind of catching myself, like, oh, I know where I got that. Like, I hear Jocko's influence right now, or I hear Alan Woody's influence, was the bass player in the Allman Brothers and Government Mule. I hear there's Paul Chambers, there's Rick Tanko in my playing, and like, then the longer I find myself sitting in that thought, the more I feel myself starting to sound bad and think, wow, they do them better than I do them. So why aren't you trying to be you now? And that's hearing myself say that, I sound like an arrogant ass.
Because think about working in the studio, especially now. It's like you'll come up with parts, and the producer will be like mentioning like 7 different bands.
Yeah.
That all of it. Also, that thing is like this, and this is like that kind of thing. And it's like we do it when we.
Oh sure.
When we are in the studio.
I could see how you guys could fit and adapt to so many musical situations. In which of these musical situations that you're currently in do you feel most at home? And what is it about it that makes you feel most at home?
For me, it's this band. It's Paris Monster. Because this band doesn't work if we're not each being ourselves. If I'm not being myself when I'm playing in Paris Monster, I feel like something's wrong. Like I should only be doing exactly what I want to do, and that's a pretty good feeling. Because it's 2 of us, there's plenty of room for a lot of different interests to come to the surface.
For me, this is it. Enough time has gone by in my life where it's like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do, because the amount of color involved in this band, the amount of everything is open. I mean, it's just
and also not to cut you off, but the writing, like I forget,
the writing,
that's the other half part of that, is that we both love to write songs.
We're going to wrap it up here in a second, but I want to let everybody out there know that we just spent the day recording 4 performances here in a studio in Nashville with Josh and Geoff. They were kind enough to give us their time and travel down here, book a little tour around it. And thank you guys so much for doing that.
Man,
thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we've been wanting to come down here for a while, and this is fantastic.
Before we leave, can you guys give a sense of what you think, or at least hope, that what you'd like to see happen in the future for you guys as a band?
Well, we're working on a full-length album right now, so that's the short-term goal.
That's a big step for us, and a good step. And it's the next step.
Mm-hmm. Thanks again for your time, and
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks everybody out there for listening, and hope you enjoyed the podcast, and take care. Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.